So I always love that as we're standing and we put the Torah away, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha B'Neshuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Like it's such a stirring moment, and especially on the high holidays. Yeah, there's 1,000 people in here. I mean, Asa gets this all the time, but there's really only, like at Mincha before, like I usually just do a quick something, or at the end, and when it's amazing. Like 1,000 people all singing at the same time. And even though, again, that's not my theology, it certainly is impactful to be thinking that all of this is directed into the ark, right? Like that's sort of like it's directed there or it's directed out. It's sort of like the Raiders of the Lost Ark scene, but in a good way. And so what I'm struck with here, and our topic today will be sort of rabbinic creativity, is that this last line, the line that we just sang, is actually from the book of Lamentations. And it is the rabbinic power and creative power to totally invert the meaning of something because they want to, and they place it in. Right earlier when I talked about Ein Kamocha, the beginning of the Torah service, it was all of these little snippets of different parts of Psalms and of different sections that put together. So we see that kind of corpus leading into the Torah service as a single unit, but actually it's a single unit made up of lots of different parts of Tanakh. I have in my head they're sitting in a room filled with all of the different pieces of Tanakh in front of them, and they're saying, let's pick this from over here and over there, and they splice it together into what we know as. So here, this very last line is from Lamentations. What's the... Shuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Exactly. See, I'm not a chazan, so I can't click into it like that. But there in Echatrop, it has a very different feel and meaning to it. But we, the rabbis, and us today, we have it as this peak moment. And so I love that. So what we're going to do is I want to look at a different text that too many of us have heard before. So I'm going to slow down, but I want us to look at it with that same sense that the rabbis have done. They have parsed together all different types of rabbinic material or Tanakh material, and they put it together for a particular moment. And that moment is at a burial. So this is at the text that I'm bringing. It's called Tzaduk HaDin, and it is a prayer that is recited at the graveside. So most of us have probably been to a burial before, but this is like the most emotional moment. Some people different rabbis recite Tzaduk HaDin at different moments. I recite it as the casket is being lowered. So like I said, you've heard it, but you were not focused on these words. You were focused on the emotions of that moment. Others recite it after the casket is covered with earth. Some recite it then. It's not, the choreography doesn't matter one way or the other, but that's when it is. And it's such an emotional moment. And so what I'll ask is, why did the rabbis parse all of these texts together? What were they trying to tell us, to have us focus on? Right? Of course, you could see that this has been on my mind because I talked a little bit on Yom Kippur about that, what's the theology of it. But I thought I would ease us into this with, I think it's kind of a humorous text. This is from the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is from 1565, approximately. Someone will say oh no, it's from 1563. And you would be right, but it wasn't printed until 2 years later. So 1565 from the Shulchan Aruch. This is the classic corpus of Jewish law, and it's about a eulogy and how much you can eulogize someone, and can you say only nice things? But, right, so I find it a little humorous, and they have had this experience. I won't ask you to raise your hand. Have you been to the funeral of someone who just was not a nice person, and they get up there and you're like, that is not the person I know. I know no one has ever had that experience before, but the Shulchan Aruch appears to. So let's look at this at the top of the page. And then we'll go into that Tzaduk HaDin. It is an important religious duty to lament the dead fittingly, and the religious duty is fulfilled when one raises his voice in funeral lamentations to utter over him, the dead person, words which break the heart in order to cause much weeping, right? The eulogy is supposed to be like really emotional, and you could read it, are you supposed to cry? I think I read it as it's okay to cry, right? It's okay to be emotional, because you mentioned the praise of the deceased. It is forbidden to overpraise too much, though. Clearly, it's responding to Joseph Caro's been to funerals where that person was not as nice as you're portraying them, right? It is forbidden to overpraise him too much, save to mention his good characteristic features, to which a little may be added, right? You can focus on the good things a bit, because that's the proper way of social construct. And maybe you might even add a little bit to how kind they were, provided one does not over-exaggerate about how good they were. And if he possessed no good characteristic features whatever, one should not mention this regarding him. Right? You can't get up and eulogize a jerk and say he was a jerk. That's forbidden by the Shulchan Aruch. With respect to the sage, though, and I want you to plan ahead. I'll be here till 120, I hope, but you got to plan ahead. A sage and a pious person, one may mention their wisdom and piety respectively, and one who mentions regarding one who did not possess it at all, right, an ignoramus, or exaggerate too much that which he did possess causes him harm and to the dead, right? So if you exaggerate one way or the other in your eulogy, you are causing harm to yourself and to the dead. How are you causing harm to yourself? Right, you're making stuff up, and everyone's going to know, right? Everyone's going to know, so you are undermining your own kind of authentic self, because you're going to be standing in front of the community gathered, and they're going to know if you're lying about this, I'm not going to believe you about any other thing that you're talking about, because either you actually thought that horrible person was a good person, so I question your character, or you're totally making stuff up, and so therefore I'm also going to be questioning your character. So the essence of a eulogy has to be authenticity to what your relationship is to the person. And often I might even say, I didn't know this person. If I didn't know this person, I don't try to portray myself as having a relationship with someone when honestly the first time I might have interacted with the family is around the funeral. Right? And so it sort of comes from this place. And so when I didn't know someone and I say, I didn't know this person, and what I learned by sitting with the family is X, Y, and Z, I think that fits better. And so the Shulchan Aruch, I think, supports that approach to a hesped, to a eulogy. So let's jump into the Tzaduk HaDin. And the hook, why am I bringing this for this week? The hook is this first line of the prayer is from this parsha, is from this week's parsha. Okay? So, Hatur tamim po'olo ki chol drachav mishpat el emunah ve'en avel tzadik ve'yasharhu. Right? It comes from this parsha, and so I thought this would be a good hook into it. So I didn't do this for the entire prayer, but I actually want to keep doing it for the middle section, is I underline the verses of the prayer that come from someplace else, and I tried to give you the reference for it. So we really get this experience of it being a mashup, a mix of, remember, the rabbis they're sitting around with all the table, all the text in front of them, and they're saying, I want a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The other thing as we read, as I spoke on Yom Kippur, is about metaphor. Right? So why are they bringing this metaphor at this moment, at the casket is being lowered? It's the most evocative moment. And what are they trying to tell us or to reassure us in this moment? So the rock, Tzur, the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, righteous and just is he. So let's just take that first. That's the verse from this week's reading. Why do the rabbis want us to say that at that moment of the casket being lowered?
When someone dies, many times people lose faith in God.
When someone dies, many times people lose faith or have doubt in God.
And this is, I assume, meant to reassure that God is present.
So it's to, Craig is saying, people lose faith or have doubt when someone dies, and that saying this affirmation that God is just, God is right, it's sort of a statement of faith. Right? He adds, when we hear of someone's passing, we say Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Right? That that's the blessing of any bad news that we hear. Someone's death is the worst news, or the most extreme news, but of that God is the God of truth. So it's maybe purposefully in contrast. Yeah, Asa.
It's also the text from Yizkor, Adonai Ma'ada V'Tadai. It's like the perspective of our lives versus eternity, the eternal. There's a lot of talk in the high holidays too about like our very short time here, and God's sort of like endless days. His years were endless, and our days are like a passing shadow.
Asa points out that there's a contrast between God's eternal number of days and our days are limited. And so there's a recurring sense of humility in this. So one is that God is just at the time that it possibly could feel unjust, and a recognition of our limited days on earth. Great. I also purposely left in here that, you see the G-D? So the first day of rabbinical school, we were set up for this. One of my professors said, people try to be very pious and righteous the first days of rabbinical school, and he wanted to break us out of that. So someone wrote on the board G-D, and because he thought he was being like really pious to it, and G-D is not God's name. G-O-D is also not God's name, right? What is God's name? Yud, He, Vav, He, right? Yud, He, Vav, He. So anything that is not Yud, He, Vav, He, the professor scolded us, is not God's name. So therefore, we don't have to be extra, like a pious on top. This is a fence on the fence on the fence here. But the translation that I brought had that, and so I brought it here. So the only things that need to go into the Geniza really are something that says Yod He Vav He, not G-O-D, G-D, things like that. So I left that there on purpose. Okay, Aryeh.
I'm going to say one of the things that resonates
Aria points out this sort of I don't know if it's an inverse relationship but it's like the worse you feel about someone's passing is an indication of the closeness that you felt to them. And so maybe on the one hand, this can be God, you are still just even when I doubt, or maybe it could be seen as a blessing of gratitude, right? Thank you for this relationship. I am broken in this moment because I'm feeling the brokenness of this loss. And I'm grateful that I had that relationship as well. Josh?
It strikes me that it's sort of thematically very similar, at least that line, to the Mourner's Cottage, which doesn't talk about loss, but is all about sort of exalting God. So to the extent to which, I don't know, liturgically when they were written,
Uh-huh.
together, if the theme here was in a time of loss, we want to focus on God's greatness, sort of trace it through different parts of the
Josh is saying that similar to the Mourner's Cottage, that focuses not on death but on the greatness of God, the grandeur and greatness of God. This also seems to focus on that as well. So, okay, let's read through. The rock, again, the rock, why is this a metaphor that's used at this moment as you're lowering the casket? Why is that a good metaphor?
You need something to lean on.
Yeah, because you need something to lean on, right? That you want God or the Jewish people, or you need something because you feel so adrift that you need something to anchor yourself to. So that image of God is like a rock. There's a great book. It's a children's book, and it is profound. It's called Old Turtle, and I love it. Old Turtle, it's beautifully, the pictures are watercolors, and basically the turtle sees God as slow and wise, and the gazelle sees God as fast, and the river sees God as flowing, right? It's all of these different metaphors, and everyone sees God like they are. And then, of course, the end of the book, spoiler alert, is that they all come together and they see that God is all of these things, right? So it's a beautiful book, full stop, and it's a beautiful book about imagery of God as well. So I think Hatzur, the rock, is perfect for this moment. So the rock, perfect in his work, who can say to him, what have you done? He rules below and above. He brings death and restores life, brings down to the grave and raises up from there. So that's from 1 Samuel. Right? I think I like to read it as the casket is being lowered because of that line there. Like we're actually enacting what this pasuk says. The rock, perfect in all his deeds, who can say to him, what do you do? You who says and fulfills, do undeserved kindness with us in the merit of him, in the merit of Isaac, who was bound on the altar like a lamb, hearken and grant our request. Righteous one in all his ways, O rock, who is perfect, slow to anger and abundant in mercy. And that's clearly a familiar verse there. Take pity and spare both parents and children, for to you, O Lord, pertain forgiveness and mercy. Righteous are you, Lord, to bring death and to restore life, for in your hands are entrusted all the spirits. And so we see this repetition of God both brings death and also brings life, right? It's eschatology here, that there's a affirmation that while this is a moment of intensity surrounding death, that it's a eschatological statement that there will be a life to come, a world to come there. Far be it from you to erase our memory. Look towards us with mercy, for yours, O Lord, are mercy and forgiveness. A man, whether he be a year old or whether he lives 1,000 years, what does he profit? What does it profit him? For is it not as if he has never been? Blessed be the true judge, who brings death and restores life. Blessed be he, for his judgment is true, as he scans everything with his eye, and he rewards man according to his account and his judgment. Right? That's the high holiday theme of judgment. Right? Let all give praise to his name. We know, Lord, that your judgment is right, from Psalms. You are righteous when you speak and pure when you judge, and none shall question your judgment. Again, that's from Psalm 51. Righteous are you, Lord, and your judgments are just, from Psalm 119. You are the true judge who judges with righteousness and truth. Blessed is the true judge, for all his judgments are righteous and true. Why is there this repetition? This is back what Craig was saying. Why? It's like, okay, enough, I get it. But these are all psukim, or sections of text, that are reaffirming God's righteousness over and over and over and over again, because it feels like the rabbis are trying to convince us, because we may be feeling the exact opposite. Adam?
There's another repetition of God restores life, and they're doing this as you're dealing with the grief of death. So there's a little bit of denying just the river of Egypt kind of thing. And but I think I can maybe make the link to Yom Kippur, where we are given a chance to start over again. So there's that kind of restoring of life. But restoring life at the time of death is a little bit magical for me.
Yeah. So Adam is saying there's also this repetition of Mechai Hamitim, right? That God will give life after, and that maybe it's because you're so deeply focused on death at that moment of the casket going down that you may need the comfort of thinking that life will continue, this relationship will continue sometime later. Again, I've said this many times, Gilman taught me that theology doesn't have to be consistent, it just has to work. Right? So the theology at this moment at the graveside can be a theology that you don't necessarily believe in when you're at a coffee shop. Right? So, but the theology of life after death, of a world to come, is the most comforting thing you can hold on to at that moment. And then when you're in a different emotional place, you may intellectually not think that that's something that's happening. And Gilman would say, both are fine. Right? You can have both of those. R.A.?
Liturgy also makes it accessible in a way. In the Almale, it talks about, that the soul will be bound up in the bonds of life. So if you can't get your head around the notion of that this soul is going to go to some bar in the sky, that we have the notion that the soul is bound up within us, and we certainly have the ability, that's accessible to us because we, by continuing to remember the person and by continuing to continue their legacy, keep that soul alive. So you don't have to think about something that's kind of metaphysical or magical or whatever. And so I think liturgy gives us both. It gives us that, and then it gives kind of like the aspect that you can much more easily access.
Yeah, so if I can capture what R.A. said, is that in the El Malei Rachamim, another statement of theological principles that we recite at a funeral, at the graveside, and during the ceremony, says that you are bound up, the soul is bound up in the bonds of life, he said. So maybe that means that's the bonds of the living, he's saying. But the imagery in the El Malei is also of Gan Eden as well. So it's all of these offerings, if you will, that they're giving. So the soul of every living creature from the book of Job is in your hand. Righteousness fills your right hand. You have mercy of the remnant of the flock under your hand, and say to the angel of death, hold back your hand. You are great in counsel and mighty in action. Your eyes are watching all the ways of man, to give man according to his ways and according to the fruits of his deeds, from Jeremiah. That is to say that the Lord is just. He is my strength, and there is no injustice in him, from Psalm 92. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken. May the name of the Lord be blessed, from Job. He, being compassionate, pardons iniquity and does not destroy. Time and again, he turns away his anger and does not arouse his wrath. From Psalm 78. So I think at the moment of death, the rabbis are trying to guide us towards, to say something that may be unnatural. It's not the emotion that you're holding on to. And maybe that's exactly what they want us to do. To say something that is counterintuitive, because they know the emotions that we're having is heartbreak and grief. It's so, like, as I said before, so evocative to have the casket lowered, and that you are then going to put earth on top of the casket. And maybe they're saying, Davka, we're going to make a statement of faith at this time of incredible heartbreak, which may be doubt or maybe other things. Yeah, Rabbi?
Hi. At this time, we, as a world society, are encountering the emulsification of death.
In what way?
If we stop and tabulate how many have died on battlefields or in their own homes through no fault of their own, in the Ukraine or in Gaza,
Or throughout Africa, or throughout.
there have been a million deaths between the two wars and conflicts.
Mhm.
So death is kind of an everyday thing for people. I used to wonder, in my early years as a rabbi, every funeral was almost packed. In the later years, partly because people live longer, and so there's nobody to attend those funerals. As one cantor said to me about a 90-year-old, they moved it into a small chapel and there were 30 to 40 people there. He said, if he had died 20 years ago, there would have been a big crowd. So I said, well, would it have been worth it?
Mhm.
And I think the Kaddish itself really is not an antidote to death. It gives people something to say when they feel they have to say something.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't embarrass anybody. It doesn't judge anybody. But it does steady the emotions that death is as much a reality as this moment we're living right now.
Yeah. So Rabbi Zellemeyer is saying that that death is constant. Right? He referenced war zones, of which there's 50, 100 wars going on at any time. The front of the New York Times appears that there's only 2 wars going on, right? But there are conflicts around the world in places that don't get covered. But also, we know that death, because that's what you were focusing on, death is guaranteed following birth. We don't know when, but life is a terminal disease. Eventually you will, everyone that is alive will die at some point. And you were saying that it appears that the number of people that come to your funeral, that must judge how good you are. But that's also a wrong formulation, because an old person who has outlived their friends will not have that many people at their funeral. And maybe that's more worthwhile, right? Because you had said, is it worth the trade-off of dying younger? I'm thinking, as I'm standing here with this topic, that I remember the death of a 45-year-old mom maybe she was 50 years old, mom, it was opened up like high holidays. And there were people standing on the side. It was unbelievable. It was a tragic death, and that was unbelievable. But you said, rightly, is it worth it? Is it worth it to die young and have a lot of people at your funeral? Because that's tragic. It is not tragic when an old person dies. It's sad, but we think that it's not tragic. I don't know if that's the right criteria or not, but it's something that as clergy we encounter often, that type of question. Matt, I might give you the last word.
This, I hope, relates to what the Rabbi just said. I see how the words on this page can relate to, or possibly even be a comfort to, someone who is considering the death of a parent's generation, right? I don't see how any of this is comforting to a parent who is burying a child, other than sore.
Something to hold on to, right? That when things go in the right order, which is a theological assumption that there's an order, but that older people should die before younger people, right? That's the order that we think. But what about when a parent buries a child? And I will tell you, I could picture it, right? The casket was tiny. Horrible. That just feels wrong in all of those ways, right? In all of those ways. And how can we be expected to say something like this, that God is just and God is righteous and that God understands? That's the challenge of the theology. So I think that what we should end with is, does this work? How does this work for you? I always think that should be the question for us as we encounter liturgy. How would we tweak this in our own individual life? Like take this home, and I would be interested, how would you rewrite this? You might add different metaphors to it. You might bring different Jewish texts into this, or bring texts from wherever else you're inspired by. Because theology doesn't have to be consistent, it just has to work for you in the moment that you need it to work, Gilman taught. And I think there's a truth to it. When we're at that moment of lowering the casket, when we're in the hospital room, we might want a God that intervenes for good. And when we're sitting in a class, we may not think that God intervenes in that way. When we are about to go on to the operating table, we may ask for God to bring blessing and focus and concentration to the surgeon, right? To rely on their training in that moment. But if you ask someone that wasn't in that moment, do you think that God focuses on the pilot and makes them remember their training when the engines go out? Or is it just repeated training that they've done, and so muscle memory kicks in for whatever the trauma is in that moment? I don't know. We can ask Captain Sully about what kicked in for him when the plane was going down in the Hudson, right? Or to a surgeon who underwent a really difficult moment, and he or she was losing the patient, and then he remembered something that was able to do something. I don't want to use any medical parlance here, right? Able to do something. Was that divine intervention, or was that a well-trained doctor? Or maybe it's all of those things together. So, Hatzur tamim po'olo ki chol drachav mishpat el emunah ve'en avel tzadik ve'yasharhu. The rock, his work seems to be perfect, even when I feel so much imperfection as I'm lowering the casket. For all of God's ways are just, and God, the God of faithfulness and without iniquity, righteousness, and just is God. Shabbat Shalom.